Does your financial advisor take the time to really listen to you? Is your financial strategy personalized to you and your family? Will your financial advisor be there as your life and financial situation change? Hi, I'm Jerry Mangona, your Edward Jones financial advisor. I live here in Corktown, just a few blocks from the Daily Detroit studios, and when we work together, we'll focus on what's important to you. We'll use an established process to create a personalized financial strategy backed by the advice, tools, and resources to help you reach your goals. And we'll partner together to help your strategy stay on track. Contact me toll-free today at 866-975-8655. Again, that's 866-975-8655. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is Thursday, June 29th, 2023. Today, a conversation I'm glad to bring to you because it's about the future. So Tim Slusser is the Chief of Mobility Innovation for the city of Detroit, and he is doing some very interesting things that I think are going to really change how we look at our city going forward, the kinds of companies, the kinds of jobs, and how our streets look. So, caught up with him up on Mackinac Island. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Joining me at the table, Tim Slusser. He is the Chief of Mobility for the city of Detroit. Welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
There's so many ways you could take this conversation, right? Whether it's the context of electric vehicles, whether it's the context of equity dealing with all these changes, infrastructure, how it ties into transit. So I guess first off, like, what is your biggest goal in your position?
Yeah, so let me first start by saying, because I completely agree, mobility is so broad, right? So we define mobility in my office as the movement of people, goods, and services. Okay, oftentimes we talk about the movement of people. We often forget about movement of goods and services. So there's a lot of different things that we can do there. But my office focuses on electrification. It focuses on micromobility and alternative forms of transportation. It focuses on integration into public transit, right? It focuses on the future of autonomous vehicles, the future of connected infrastructure, basically anything that looks different than our transportation and transit systems as they exist today. And anything that will take us from where we are today to a more sustainable, both environmentally and business model, focus, sustainable forms of transportation for the future. So it's a very, very wide task that we've got here.
I feel like there's a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. I mean, there's a city here that has been known as the Motor City for so long. Yeah. There's so much done here. There's cars, built here, designed here, all those things in the city proper. But also, you do have some stunning poverty and inequality within it. Yeah. And squaring those two things up, I mean, for the average person, they go, okay, well, EVs are great and whatever, but, price tag, whatever. How's that going to affect, and how can you take what you do and help it relate to the more average or challenged Detroit resident?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like the cornerstone question that we get across the board, doesn't matter what I'm talking about, right? And I'll give you an autonomous vehicle example that we have, right? And so, autonomous vehicles are not cheap, right? And what we often get approached, whether it's by the community or funders, is say, why are you trying to solve this problem by using an AV, right? It costs 10 times as much. Why don't you just buy a vehicle, put a driver in it, and have that driver drive people around, right? And the answer is, listen, you can do that, but that's the problem as it exists today. And if we just continue to do the same thing over and over and over, we all know what the definition of insanity is, right? So we're not just trying to solve the technology problem. We're trying to solve the business model problem. And so we've got a project that is federally funded called Automated Driving Systems. This is to put an autonomous vehicle on the streets of Detroit to serve our elderly and our disabled populations. Okay, this is because it's federally funded. That's the specific demographic we're targeting, and so it's not just about getting the vehicle out there to help them, move from point A to point B, but it's also about understanding what does it take to get these individuals comfortable. taking an autonomous vehicle? What does it take to kind of identify the right business model elements that can create a sustainable business model so that we don't have to keep going back to funders and saying, hey, I need more funding to buy that vehicle and hire the driver. And we can do it differently in a way that, again, long-term is more financially sustainable. So it might cost more upfront, but long-term, it gives us options that we weren't looking at before.
Well, one of the challenges of having to go back to funders over and over again is that times change, people change, decision makers change, and you could have a program that's working really well for you, but if a core funder's like priorities change, you're SOL.
You are absolutely right. So we really need to, like you mentioned, the title, right? Chief of Mobility Innovation. It's that innovation element that we have to lean into to solve our challenges here in the city of Detroit, right? It does provide us with great opportunity, right? Every challenge presents opportunities if you can find it. And so we're in Detroit, we're no stranger to bootstrapping and dealing with these hard challenges. And it forces us to think creatively. So by embracing the innovation elements here, we can look at things differently. We can try and approach the problem a little bit differently. And we are striving to be a model city across the country to solve these types of challenges in, majority, the highest concentration of non-white population in the country. One of our largest major metropolitan areas, dealing with some of the highest rates of poverty, dealing with some of the highest rates of asthma and health issues. Like the cards are stacked, and if you can do it in Detroit, we know you can do it anywhere. So that's part of our pitch. That's part of what's helping us attract some of this interest and investment. But I think we've got a really solid approach we're taking right now.
You mentioned about our large metro area, and that's a geographic fact, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one of the challenges with that is getting to work. So there was the Gallup study that came out saying that around half of Detroiters have difficulty getting to jobs or jobs that they want to get to because they don't have those transportation mobility options. But then also, we both know this, that a lot of people who have jobs in the city, they go to the suburbs. A lot of people from the suburbs are going to jobs in the city. And that's, you need to circle a square there. And so how could mobility and innovation help do that? And I promise listeners, I'm going to talk about transit in a second, but when you get into this, like how can this help?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're talking about is options, right? Options both in how I get from point A to point B, and options in terms of what I have available to me for my own employment. Right, so we have been working with a number of companies. When I first joined the organization a little over 18 months ago, to try and identify some businesses that were hardest hit by turnover. Right, so employees that didn't have reliable forms of transportation and the costs that they experience. In trying to say, okay, listen, if we could create a model where we invest in infrastructure jointly with you. And let's say your turnover costs are $500,000 a year, okay? And these are not fake numbers; these are actually real numbers. If you guys were willing to put $250,000, so half of the turnover cost, and we were able to set up a program that could give your employees more reliable transportation, so you didn't have to constantly retrain, you didn't have to constantly hire, right? You could promote, you could give opportunities to these people who could then go home and actually have better lives for their families. Would you be interested? They were, right? So COVID disrupted that. Right, we had a great program design. COVID gave us a lot of challenges, but we continue to hit at that element to say, how can we think creatively, form partnerships where partnerships didn't exist before, and trying to address these things. So again, it comes back to new solutions to give more options for how we get from point A to point B, as well as bringing jobs to the city of Detroit, right? So that we don't have to leave the city of Detroit to go get those jobs. And the only people who are working in the city of Detroit are the people who are coming in here from the suburbs.
A challenge with that is that so many of these jobs are geographically dispersed. You look at a map or an employment density map, because this is the kind of things that I do in my spare time. It's all over the place. There's a few centers, but when you're talking about, whether it's hospitality jobs or you're talking about, working on some sort of line or working in an office park or whatever, it's all over the place. So it's kind of hard to nail that down with transit, that frankly, a lot of people are taking 2 or 3 buses to get into the outer areas, eating up a ton of their time when it's hard to run a bus practically. And I'm a huge mass transit advocate personally, but it's hard to run a bus for 5 people. So there are things that can help with that too, right?
Well, first, let me thank you for being a mass transit advocate, right? I think we need more people who understand how important mass transit is. And it's not just for the low income people, okay? But we need more people who are vocally advocates for transit. So, all right, having said that, answering your question, what we really need to be doing is, figuring out how we can, create opportunities for these multiple modes to complement one another, right? And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of community engagement, right? You got to understand what modes people are willing to try and what they're not. You can't just go and say, hey, here's this new mode, go use it. Well, if you don't use it, oh, then you're crazy, right? Like, no, you need to understand what people actually want, what they're willing to accept, right? Not everyone's willing to hop into an autonomous vehicle today. That's totally fine. We need to understand how we engage in the right way, how we share the right information with them to help remove those unknowns, remove that fear, right? It truly is a fear-based decision, and that's okay, but we need to take the time to communicate with them, understand, what those concerns are, and then, fill in that gap. So there's a lot of work to do.
You mentioned attracting and having these jobs here. What are the kinds of things that your work in mobility is doing to try to encourage those companies, whether they are longstanding companies or startups?
We want to make Detroit friendly to innovation. The biggest challenge with innovation is policy. All right. When you take innovation, you are typically disrupting the existing model. And when it comes to policy, they don't like that, right? So we are trying to reshape how we think about this in Detroit. Back in January, we passed our Transportation Innovation Zone through City Council. 9-0 vote, unanimous approval. And what this Transportation Innovation Zone ordinance does is it creates a physical zone centered in our Corktown, North Corktown, Hubbard-Richard neighborhoods. It's about 2.2 square miles, if my math is correct. And it fast tracks permitting, okay? It doesn't lower the bar for what the requirements are to get permitted, but what it does is it removes the challenge that typically existed where an innovator, a company, small or large, would have to navigate the internal process, right, at the city to get those permits. And they might go to one department and find out, oh, I actually need 2 permits, and I got to go to a second department, right? And they get bounced back and forth. We've seen this take 6, 9, 12 months in some instances, right, for something that is as simple as a sign that somebody wanted to bolt into the ground, okay? Detroit is not the only city that they experience this, okay? This is common across the country. But what we've done with this ordinance is we've said, okay, we're going to streamline the process. My office, the Office of Mobility and Innovation, has now the authority to issue temporary permits, okay, up to 180 days. And we are responsible for bringing all of our partner departments together to review these applications, understand the challenges, ask questions, tell them what they need to do in order to get permitted. And our goal is to try and issue those permits in approximately 30 days, right? So going from 6, 9, 12 months to 30 days, that's a huge change. It's especially a change for the small businesses, right? Our startups and innovators here in the city of Detroit, external to the city or even the state, companies that are innovative and looking to try and grow. We think we're creating something that addresses this challenge in a very unique way. We haven't seen a single other city in the country do this. And we are trying to make Detroit both friendly and sticky. Because if you're a company, especially one that comes from outside the city or the state, you come to Detroit, you use this Transportation Innovation Zone, you deploy your technology, you see success, you're going to continue to innovate. You're going to continue to iterate. You're going to want to stay here because it's so easy to do work with the city of Detroit. You're going to want to locate your business in an area where the policy is literally being designed to support not only you, but your industry, right? Because if we're supporting your industry, we're creating customers for you.
And it kind of helps even the playing field, doesn't it?
Yes,
right?
100%.
Because a Ford or a GM, they've got the lawyers and the infrastructure.
You got
they
it.
Can, when you have large permitting process or anything that takes a long time like that, it always favors the incumbent
100%.
because the incumbent has the resources to deal with it. And a smaller company is going to go where the path of least resistance.
And thank you so much for pointing that out, right? Like, and that is a challenge that we had to really help people understand, right? Especially our city council. It's a great question to ask, and it's something they really pressed me hard on. And I said, listen, guys, just like you said, those incumbents have the teams. They've worked our process. They know our process. But these small players, these startups, these black and brown businesses that are just trying to get started, they don't have, 2 months could be life or death for that company, right? So just removing that barrier creates so much more opportunity for them. That is really why it was designed this way.
So what are some of the ways that you're working on tying in EV infrastructure with the rest of the residents of the city of Detroit, right? Like somebody who makes a bunch of money is going to go ahead and put their 240 plug in their house and whatever, all that stuff, right? But that isn't the majority of the city of Detroit. And there's real questions about equity when it comes to, EVs are more expensive, all these other things. How do you look at this challenge of bringing Detroit up to speed? Because at the end of the day, just like you said, you need to future build. If you just go for like better of what we had, we're going to be even more left behind.
Yeah, and so again, thank you for this. You're asking a ton of great questions. This is challenge numero uno. Okay, this is the biggest challenge that I have to deal with, and there's a lot of federal funding out there right now that is targeting the build out of EV infrastructure across the country. And the number one thing that they want to focus on with that funding is equity. Right? They want to create not just equal, but equitable opportunities for all. And so when you start talking about a city like Detroit, right, where we've got a high percentage of poverty, we've got a high percentage of individuals, that can't own a car, right? They choose not to, but can't, right? How if I just go and install a bunch of EV charging stations out there, they can't participate. That is not equitable, right? So what we're looking at and what we're building here in the city of Detroit is a plan that we are going to be starting to execute very, very soon, where we are not just going to be providing access to charging infrastructure where, let's be honest, private industry would not be looking to invest today or tomorrow. We're going to. And then we're going to pair that charging infrastructure with EV car sharing options, right? As an example, so that we can provide not just access to the infrastructure, but access to electrified forms of transportation for anybody in the city of Detroit with a driver's license, right? So if you, need to take your grandmother to her doctor's appointment and you don't own a car, you can go down to one of these locations, you can rent one of these EVs, you can take her to, her doctor's appointment. And really help out the family, right? Like this is something that a lot of our Detroit residents and families deal with on a daily basis that so many of us take for granted. And so, we want to really try and lean into how we can create examples for how equity can be, really shine through some of these investments and be a model city across the nation for how to address this, because we're not the only city that has these problems.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I really appreciate your time on Daily Detroit. This is all fascinating stuff to me. And I'm so glad that we're looking at this in kind of a more holistic way, because I think, again, power of and in the conference and all the taglines.
Yes.
There is this conversation of it's either transit or EVs or autonomous or mobility. And I think the future is going to be kind of linking them all together, if we're honest.
Absolutely, right. And I think that really is, for this discussion we're having right here, that is the and, right? Nothing that we are trying to do at my office is in lieu of, right? Or
because I get the sense from you that you, although buses aren't underneath your purview per se, you would look at the systems and go, if we could do more things, it would be an improvement.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I'll touch on two things since you just gave me a great cue up. Number one, prior you mentioned the Motor City, right? And I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what is the future moniker? And I've said, I think we're still the Motor City, but now we need to redefine what that motor means, what it looks like, right? Everyone used to associate it with a combustion engine in a car. Maybe it's an electric engine. Maybe it's the motor that drives us all. Maybe it's, something else, right? So I think, we're still the Motor City. I think we'll always be the Motor City, but the definition of motor might change. And then the other thing is the future of mobility and transportation in Detroit is shared, Okay. It might come as a surprise to some that the Motor City isn't planning its future around a privately owned vehicle. The future of transportation mobility in the city of Detroit is shared. Transit is the OG of shared transportation. And then I mentioned EV car sharing. I didn't yet mention, scooters and shared bikes. I didn't yet mention, how the autonomous vehicles are going to be, accessible to the masses in Detroit here in the not too distant future. We're going to take a very, calculated and, slow approach to that. But we are 100% looking at how all of these options are shared options. Single occupancy vehicles is not anywhere on our radar.
That's interesting. All right. Well, Tim, I appreciate you, and let's catch up again soon.
I would like that. Thank you, Jeremiah.
All right, we are done for today. Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. I hope this conversation made you think about a few things. And if you've got thoughts, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Would love to hear them. With that, I am Jer Stays. Tomorrow, Mr. Friday, Devin O'Reilly is in the studio chair. So remember that you are somebody. We'll see you around Detroit.